Cresson Sanatorium, Lawrence Frick Hospital, State Correctional Institute. The facilities were in operation from 1916 until 2013. And I say facilities because there's a lot of history that's happened in a great deal of these buildings at the Cresson Sanatorium, or simply known by the locals as the San. Timber Adventures thanks you for joining us, and we hope you like our videos. Please share, comment, like, subscribe. Help small channels like ours. I had done a prior video on Cresson, and it did not do justice to the multitude of photos and videos that I compiled while I was there. I was there as a visitor, not as a resident or an inmate. But yeah, about 2023, I believe, I paid for a self-guided photo tour, and I had the access to every single building throughout the entire 500 plus acres. And I'll describe my own touring, but here's a history rundown. What was the San? From 1916 to 1964, it provided care for tuberculosis patients. In 1964, it became the Lawrence Frick State Hospital for the Insane. 1987, the purpose changed once again to the State Correctional Institute, and it closed up shop in 2013. But since then, it was a hydroponics growing facility known as the Big House Produce, which grew hemp. And I believe it's since empty now, as the future's kind of up in the air, but more on that at the end of the video. In its infancy, the San was a revolutionary new concept of a nursing school where it truly would be a hands-on training. It was built on land donated by Andrew Carnegie, and it was built atop the Cresson summit to provide fresh air and flow for healing. It was to be one of the first racially integrated centers, which would have been truly groundbreaking back in 1916. It was such an impactful and unlimited future potential. Helen Keller actually presented a speech in 1920 about the facility. During this time, from 1916 to 1964, over 40,000 people passed through the threshold, and those were only people on paper. It's believed to be far more, possibly thousands and thousands more, as they didn't really keep up records with any due diligence at that time. Many people passed away, and some with no family were left unclaimed, and those graves were turned over to a memorial outside the facility in later years, about 1987. There's a very extensive history of the San written, and it dates in the 1950s, and it was a former nurse that was going through a box of old papers she had taken from the facility. She came upon this booklet. If that sounds weird to randomly take papers, remember, it was the 1950s. There were no privacy laws or HIPAA. That booklet I mentioned had a long history of the facility up to the 1950s, and no one knows who wrote it or why that history was actually recorded. But that booklet and all the info is within the Cresson Historical Society right now, and you can see it down there. In the closing years of the 50s and the early 60s, new tuberculosis treatments were being introduced, and these sanatoriums were beginning to be outdated and folding up shop. But never fear, we can now use it for the insane, or in some cases, just for individuals who were slower to learn, probably intellectually limited, basically not insane. It was maybe a burden to their families or other sadly neglected normal people. But yes, they had mentally ill people here as well, but we've all heard the stories, and in the end, they now speak of the facility during that time as treating people with mild intellectual disabilities. At some point around 1986, they said, well, this is wrong. Better late than never, and they ceased the asylum, and they moved it on, did some minor renovations, and turned it into a state correctional institute. So now think about it. It was cheaper for them to renovate an existing insane asylum and convert it to a prison than it was to build up a new one. During the phase of the San, they had the pleasure to meet Joseph Kellinger, and he had tortured several families. Entire families, kidnapped, tortured, killed 3 people. He was a serial killer and a serial rapist as well. So he died there in 1996. And being that he was on suicide watch for the last 11 years of his life, he would have been housed in a very secure special needs unit. And I actually toured through that area, and it was a little island amongst these other housing units there. Kind of like a constant solitary confinement. That area may have been called the RHI. I apologize. There was a great deal to see in my time of going through there, and that just happened to be one of the units. So in June of 2013, the inmates flew the coop and were sent off to other facilities. Now my visit. I went for a self-guided tour, and I went through every area that I possibly could. And I started at the administration building, and it is a Tudor-style architecture, which is beautiful, and the woodwork is exemplary, but it's doomed. The offices were fully stocked yet. File cabinets filled with papers. Desks stocked with everything from pens to papers. You name it, it was there. Looked like they just got up and walked off one day, which they probably did. And totally like a post-apocalyptic setting. The papers, names, complaint forms from inmates, files with inmate names. In fact, in the one office, there were actually papers dated to the 1970s, which would have been the insane asylum years. In the same building, there were gymnasiums with basketballs and other equipment just lying about, made for some fantastic photos. And there were areas where the ceiling may be crumbling a bit with some plaster dust on the floor and a little asbestos topping probably. But out of the back, they had a garage area where the inmates were actually rehabbed and they learned different skills like graffiti. Now, there was a lot of graffiti back there, but painting, engine repair, auto body repair, skills they would need on the outside. We went back into the basement and then I traveled to the tunnels underneath. It was a very cool experience, literally too. I remember it was a very hot day, and as I was going through, it was a nice break. So I stopped at the Grace Chapel on my way through, went up and inside, and checked out the chapel area. Let me show you a little video of my trip inside. Here we go. Tunnel time. Those tunnels are quite long, and as you can see in the video, I hadn't even gotten to the Grace Chapel, which is kind of a midway point. Let's look at the basement of the administration building too in my walkthrough. So let's get back to the tunnel where it pops out at the Grace Chapel. That Grace Chapel has been there since the 19-teens. So I think it was 1917 when it was first built. So it's absolutely amazing to see everything just as it was. And I took lots of pictures once again inside, pictures outside of the architecture of the chapel as well, and then back into the tunnel. So I popped out, walked into and through a kitchen area. Trays, equipment, everything just left in place. Eventually, I made my way to the medical building. And once again, equipment was just left perfectly in place. There was, a brilliant photo session with x-ray equipment, dental chairs, exam tables, you name it, just sitting there. There were patient names on a whiteboard with caution like don't give them silverware or spoons and such like that. More like don't give them a fork. Anyway, I saw the laundry area. There's still shirts with name tags on them. We talk about government waste, and this is a great example. So I went in and out of the holding buildings and looked into multiple cells, the guard areas, the rooms with all the controls to open and close the doors. And you could tell which areas housed the various levels of security. This was a medium security prison, but it still had multiple levels. Like I said, they did have a serial killer and a serial rapist there at one time with Kellinger, and they also had a DuPont there who was from the millionaire family of DuPonts who was actually in there for murder. So they housed people of all levels. I had checked out the kitchen prep area, so why not check out the cafeteria? Cafeteria had this huge expansive area, and they included among them these seclusion type eating places that were small caged in areas. There was another huge gymnasium, and it had these painted murals on it that were like reminded me, the colors and the murals themselves reminded me of the Soviet era buildings and housing units. There were so many buildings I circulated through, and I traveled in all those areas. And like I said, I went through a special secure needs area, and it was a whole different type of lockdown to enter. Completely different set of security doors. It was a lockdown within a lockdown. There were maybe 12 to 14 cells in that special unit, and you could see that it was just a different setting. And I actually read where that solitary setting, a study showed that there were 14 to 18 suicides in the super isolated area compared with other areas, and they eventually eased the restrictions. Leaving there, you go outside and there is another set of buildings. And they were a similar architecture style to the older one, like the administration building. And these were used to house women. And everywhere that I looked, it stated that this was a men's only state correctional institute. But on the maps, it actually stated that this was woman specific. But once again, just imagine walking through this post-apocalyptic movie set where everything's just abandoned and shoveled and left where it stood. They could do a movie on this place. There was also an older building in the middle that was of particular interest, and it was said to be the one of the oldest, and it was used to house the sick and dying, hospice type setting, and obviously used for inmates as well. And as you made your way through, you could see the different various features and fixtures that were changed and put in place for, accommodating the inmates. So there was a little sunroom that I stepped into in that building, and that smoking smell was impregnated into the wood. It just reeked of sweat and pell-mells. The other side of the structure was of particular interest to me also, but the roof had fallen in one area because of a storm, and it prevented any access at all. Yeah, even for me. And I usually find a way around those things. But I did my best to visit every single area that I possibly could. How about now? What is the attraction? For me, it was to explore and see what was, and to take some photographs. But most people talk about the sand and are interested in the paranormal and want to know about all the ghostlings. I admit to positioning some chairs and furniture in odd places as I made my way through, just to keep people to hesitate maybe a little bit, keep them on their toes, like a skull chair in the middle of the tunnel. Let your lamp light hit that when you're walking through there. But back to the paranormal. After 2013, the sand was reopened as a hydroponics business called Big House Produce, plus Big House Productions, and it was offering tours of the historic facility, but more so, it was offering tours to check out the hauntings and the paranormal. So new folks marketed the grounds for ghost hunts, paranormal investigations, lots of talk about places coming in and out for podcasts, TV ghost investigation shows, overnight sessions, and such. I was there for 6 hours, at which time I didn't have a single unusual experience. Nothing scary or ghostly except maybe black mold in the tunnels, or the simple fact that the very fine woodwork is going to just doomed for demolition someday. I even visited the morgue, thinking that maybe it would give me a different vibe. maybe in time it will be reopened for others, and they can go in there, take photographs, and enjoy. And if you're into the paranormal thing, check it out. I do know that they did apply for the site to be a historic site, and it was denied. So there's a historical marker near the main road, and it notes the facility's history. If they were to focus more on the old buildings and just primarily the old buildings, they might have got some sort of attention for a historical aspect. So those are more historic. But I fear that the disrepair and the total abandonment and it being open to the elements, it's soon beyond any recovery possibilities. So in closing, I want to say that sanitarium and sanatorium are often used interchangeably when talking, but the difference is a sanitarium is a resting place. It is to rest and heal your mind. Think sanitize, to cleanse and recover. Sanatorium is a place for a long-term sickness, chronic illness, or a hospital setting. Calling it the sand is probably the most appropriate. Leave off the iterium and oterium. Once again, we want to thank you for tuning in and watching our videos. So please like, share, subscribe, and enjoy the various locations that we try to explore and visit. There's always an adventure around the corner, so get out there and enjoy. Cheers.